Well, hello there, geographers. It is time to talk about how people interact with the environment. Question mark. Okay, I've got a couple of learning goals for you. I want you to write these down. You're going to know what ecological services Earth provides, which we touched on last time. You're going to know how our environmental footprint is calculated, and you're going to calculate your environmental footprint yourself, and you're going to be very depressed at the results. Okay, the ecological services. I believe we touched on these the other day, but there's no reason why we shouldn't go over the game. It's called revision. So the Earth supports human life by decomposing organic waste, purifying water, forming soil, and primary production. So all of, I don't know if you guys compost or not. I sure do. But all of organic waste that lands on the soil turns back into dirt. All of the dirty water that goes out of our sewage system goes into the ocean and eventually gets purified. It can also be purified by filtering through certain soils. Soil itself gets formed from decomposition of organic waste, and primary production, and by that I mean all kinds of stuff like wood from trees, meat from animals, food from plants, material that can be made from plants and animals, mining stuff, pretty much all the stuff that primary producers work with. So miners, farmers, fishers, yada yada yada. Go Earth. Yeah, animals, crops, etc. Okay, here's a little picture showing all the different environments and how they benefit human well-being. So there we go. We've got marine environments, coastal environments, land environments, inland water environments, and urban environments. And they're all good, but we can harm them. And those arrows show all the ways that we might harm those things. We shouldn't do that. It's naughty. Our environmental footprint. So our environmental footprint is a measure of how much our lifestyle impacts the Earth. Okay? It's calculated by adding up how much carbon is produced for our lifestyle. That's not necessarily just you driving to and from school. That's like all the carbon that's gone into all of the objects that you own. The forest area, so if you live in a house with a backyard and you use a park, all of the forests that had to be cut down to give you that land, and all the animals that used to live in those forests or other natural environments. Cropland, so that's bushland and forests that are cut down to grow the food that you eat. Grazing land, so that's in Australia we're talking about the huge swathes of land in more remote areas that are used to graze cattle and sheep. Meat production uses a lot more land than just food made from plants. And fishing grounds. So if you eat fish, all of the areas of the ocean where those fish live, that land gets added up and added to your environmental footprint as well. And built up land. So all of the urban areas that you frequent, like school, the city, the cinema, playgrounds, swimming pools, blah blah blah, all of that stuff gets added into your environmental footprint. These are all of the, this is a big summary of all of the environmental effects of your lifestyle. And in rich Western countries like Australia, the footprint is very large. Australia's got one of the biggest footprints of any country in the world. There you go. You can't quite see that because my face is in the way. Humanity's ecological footprint is 1.5 Earths. That means, on average, we are using 1.5 times Earth's actual capacity to support life, which is why we are acting unsustainably. So if we keep going at that rate, we're going to use up all of the fresh water, all of the forests, all of the clean air. So we need to take some action. Now that's humanity on average. Australia's average, if you just add up all the Australians, use 6.68 Earths. So Australians are about 4.5 times worse than the world average for their environmental damage that they cause through their lifestyle. So here's a look. These stats are a few years old, but this is a look at the environmental or ecological footprints per person. Okay, and this is Earth's. Now, what you'll notice there is that Qatar, Kuwait and UAE are all really high. The reason is because the oil that they produce that they sell to other countries gets counted as their footprint. Okay, that's why theirs is really high. And so you have a look. So other than those three, which are oil producing countries, all of those top countries are all rich Western countries, well developed industries, very materially comfortable people. And then if you have a look at the bottom, just to make a comparison, have a look at some African countries and their environmental footprint, and as you can see by the size of the feet and the numbers, they are much, much lower. Okay, here's a fun activity. You're going to go to this website and you're going to calculate your own environmental footprint. You're going to write down the number of Earths that it would take to support your lifestyle. www.footprintcalculator.org. It asks you a series of questions, and in the end it will say you use 6 Earths or 10 Earths. I think mine came out at about 2.5 Earths because I'm vegan and I do various other environmental things. I've got solar panels, blah blah blah. But because I live in a rich Western country and I take a few flights here and there, even my lifestyle is still completely unsustainable. So you write down how many Earths it would take to support all the people in the world if they had your lifestyle, and I guarantee you'll be shocked. Okay, we've got a video we're going to watch. This is from the Jacaranda textbook. It's called "What Are We Doing?" Take it away. Or was it that way? I don't know.
What have you done that has changed the world today? Did you leave the tap running, cleaning your teeth, or journey to school using fossil fuels? There are few places left untouched by human-induced change. Can you think of any? Let's face it, it would be extremely difficult to live the lives that we have without some degree of environmental change. Many changes have improved human well-being, while others have negatively affected our biomes. People's growing demand for resources have overloaded many of our environments. For example, human pressure on biomes has led to land degradation and habitat and biodiversity losses. These changes then impact on human well-being, placing further pressure on the environment. To make informed, sustainable development decisions, we need to understand the complex links between the natural environment and our actions. This way of thinking is called human environment system thinking. Imagine that you wanted a house built on this bush block. You would need to investigate if there were any environmental constraints. Think about slope, soil type, drainage, existing vegetation, and bushfire risk. You would need to consider human aspects. Will the local council allow building in this place? Do I have enough money to build here? Am I going to be living too far from schools and shops? Examining the links between the environment and your own needs and values will better inform your decisions. Remember that environmental change can also naturally occur, and humans have little or no influence over floods and earthquakes. There are a number of world viewpoints about the relationship between people and the environment. You may be aware of these in your local community regarding environmental issues. One important worldview is Earth-centered, which sees humans as dependent on nature and needing to coexist rather than control it. As Mahatma Gandhi, the leader responsible for India's independence, once stated, "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed." An alternative view is human-centered, which regards humans as separate to nature and all problems solvable by technology. Chinese communist revolutionary Mao Zedong believed that progress, whether economic or otherwise, should be made without fear or consideration of environmental consequences. These two worldviews would suggest different solutions for a rapidly growing population facing acute traffic congestion. A human-centered approach suggests construction of a large freeway to absorb extra traffic, whereas an Earth-centered one would increase public transport services and introduce carpooling and bike lanes. Which is the more sustainable approach? Indigenous Australians recognised that healthy ecosystems were necessary for their survival, and they respected the close relationship between people and nature. Could you survive in the bush with your knowledge of the natural environment? Are we doing a good job of looking after our environment? As geographers, we need to evaluate human environmental impacts and devise sustainable management strategies that can reverse and prevent damage. We must ensure our actions are in accord with economic viability, environmental benefits, and social justice. Global climate change is not new. Our planet has been warming and cooling over millions of years. However, it has recently been warming at a rate faster than in any other geological time period. Human activities, such as burning fossil fuels, have directly brought about this change. Climate change will likely create global sea level increases and impact low-lying islands and coastal areas, where the bulk of the world's population lives. Another possible effect includes seasonal temperature changes that will disrupt food production. Greenhouse gases produced in one country affects others, so international cooperation is needed to address this problem. We have seen significant change and even deterioration in our natural environment that threatens the well-being of millions. A sustainable future requires us to meet the needs of the present generation, yet not compromise the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Have you taken more than you need today?
Our second video is from the Crash Course series of videos, one of my favourites. This one's about ecology and its 5 human impacts on the environment. Check it out.
At this point, people have been studying the impacts that humans have had on the world around us for a solid 50 years, and while it's hard to get a handle on exactly how the choices we make every day affect the environment, there's no question that our lifestyles, our cars, our need for more farmland, and our love of all kinds of plastic stuff are putting the hurt on ecosystems all over the world. Human activity all by itself, just people doing what they do, could be responsible for the extinction of nearly 1,000 plant and animal species to date, most of them over the last century. And even if you don't particularly care about the Barbary lion or the St. Helena olive or the passenger pigeon or anything else we've driven into extinction, the thing is, we need these other organisms. The ecosystems of the world are working very hard for us every day, filtering water, sucking carbon dioxide out of the air, producing all the food we eat, all very important ecosystem services. Benefits that the natural world provides us for free. So having ecosystems and keeping them intact is important, not only for the organisms who live in them, but also for us, the animals who rely on them for thousands and thousands of things that we could never do for ourselves. Over the next 2 episodes, we're going to look at these systems and how our actions are affecting the ecosystems that we need for our survival. Basically, we're messing up the environment 6 ways from Sunday, but to make it easy on ourselves, let's start with the top 5. We often hear about all the different ways that our behavior is affecting the biosphere: extinctions, climate change, deforestation, acid rain, desertification, pollution, and more. But you're asking, oh, well, why are all those things bad? What's going on? How is this stuff turning the Earth into sausage? I don't understand. Well, I do understand, which is why I'm qualified to make this video, so let me lay it on you. The services that ecosystems provide for us, all the dirty work they do, can be broken up into 4 different categories. There are things that we could never, ever duplicate or work around, no matter what kind of smarty-pants technology we come up with. First, healthy ecosystems provide support services that create and replenish the foundation of the Earth's biological systems. These services include recycling all of the compounds that are necessary for life through the carbon, water, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles. They also include other processes we've talked about before, like forming new soils and producing atmospheric oxygen. Some ecosystems contribute more to these services than others, but none of them can get these basic jobs done unless they are intact. 2. Ecosystems also perform provisioning services, giving us the raw materials we need to live, like the ocean provides food in the form of fish sticks and stuff. And rivers and aquifers and other freshwater sources give us water. Plants and animals also yield all kinds of fiber that we use for clothing and shelter, and all around us we find sources of fuel, whether it's biomass in the form of grasses or wood, hydropower in the form of flowing water, or the carbon locked in millions of years old trees that we're now re-releasing into the atmosphere. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Ecosystems also perform super important regulating services, moderating many of the Earth's systems that can get dangerous if they get out of whack. Like as we learned in biology, fungi and other organisms take on the task of decomposing dead things in poop. Meanwhile, plants help filter the water you drink and the air you breathe and provide flood control, and they also absorb all that carbon you exhale and that your car belches out, which in turn helps regulate the climate. And finally, number 4, ecosystems are just kind of awesome. It's nice to be surrounded by happy plants and critters doing their business. Nice, robust ecosystems give us places to play, scenes to inspire us, and things to just discover and learn about. They're less tangible but still important cultural services. An interesting thing about ecosystem services is that economists actually can and do calculate the monetary value they provide for humanity. If, for example, we had to do all of the things that ecosystems do for us, it would cost us $46 trillion per year, which is a lot considering that the output of the global economy is $66 trillion per year. So yeah, we should be happy that we don't have to pay for all that. But you'll notice that I keep saying that ecosystems can only serve up all this awesome sauce if they are intact. By that, I mean they specifically have to have their biodiversity intact, because ecosystems are just a bunch of living and non-living things working together, so unless their living parts are healthy, they're basically just rocks and weather. The main reason biodiversity is so important is that it makes ecosystems more resilient to that never-ending change we talked about a few weeks ago. Ecosystems with high biodiversity are way more resilient to disturbances than those with low biodiversity. In a high biodiversity system, if you take one species out of the mix, it's less likely that the ecosystem will collapse. Take a hectare of Amazonian rainforest. In that little patch of land, there are more different species of plants and animal than there are in all of Europe. So if a species of insect goes extinct, there's less risk that the whole house of cards will fall than, say, in the Sonoran Desert, where there are very few organisms, so the disappearance of one species could affect the entire ecosystem. So the best way to understand our impacts on the environment is through how we affect biodiversity. Unfortunately, it turns out that we've been doing a really bang-up job of endangering some of the highest biodiversity ecosystems on the planet. In some cases, we're having impacts on the organisms themselves directly. In other cases, we're affecting biodiversity indirectly by creating 1 or 2 changes in that ecosystem that cascade into all kinds of problems for living things. First, let's look at that hectare of Amazonian rainforest again, because even though it's one of those super resilient ecosystems, we're having serious impacts on it. How? Well, first, by removing a lot of what makes a forest, trees. According to some estimates, we are clear-cutting around 8,000 hectares of trees a day to provide land to graze cattle on, and to harvest wood to make coffee tables or whatever. When you cut down a hectare of rainforest, suddenly a place where a few thousand species used to live turns into a place where just a handful of species live. Some grass, some weeds, maybe some rats or mice, some insects, and, some cows. Because man, We love cows. And when you take out so many of the living things on that hectare of land, a bunch of things happen. For starters, you're not just affecting that ecosystem, but neighboring ecosystems as well. For instance, all those trees that were cut down provided the service of regulating the flow of all that rain that rainforests get, not only by absorbing some of it, but also by slowing down runoff, letting the water seep into the soil before slowly making its way into streams and rivers and ultimately the ocean. But when those trees are gone, the water hits the land and shoots off into the nearest stream, causing erosion and washing minerals and chemicals all the way to the sea, where it affects marine ecosystems. And when I say affect, I don't mean in a good way. This, my friends, is what's called a cascade effect, in this case caused by deforestation, one of the most obvious observable human impacts. In addition to causing more flooding and changes in water quality, deforestation on a large scale can lead to another impact: desertification, or the spread of dry, unproductive landscapes. But cutting down trees doesn't automatically turn a forest into a desert. Desertification is driven along by additional factors, like overgrazing by cattle and over-irrigation. So how can overwatering something make it turn into a desert? Well, when we use groundwater to irrigate crops, the natural salts in the groundwater build up in the soil, eventually making it so salty that nothing wants to live there. Over time, fertile land near desert ecosystems become overtaxed, and the desert spreads. And this is exactly what has happened in China over the past century, where overgrazing and the city's unquenchable thirst for water have caused the Gobi Desert to grow by 3,600 square kilometers every year. Now, these two impacts by themselves clearly limit the biodiversity of otherwise lush ecosystems, but because they also result in fewer trees that provide the all-important services of releasing oxygen and absorbing CO2, you know what domino's gonna fall next. The climate. Carbon dioxide, the principal greenhouse gas. It insulates the Earth, so it stands to reason that the more CO2 there is in the atmosphere, the warmer the Earth will be. And the thing is, we're reducing the size of forests at the same time as we're unleashing all kinds of greenhouse gases by burning fossil fuels. This double whammy is much of what's driving global warming. As a result, we're seeing decreases in the levels of polar sea ice, which means less habitat for polar bears, seals, and seabirds. More temperate animals are moving closer to the poles, and hotter, drier conditions are causing more grass fires and forest fires. And while the climate has changed many times in the past, those changes usually took place over centuries or even millennia, giving organisms time to adapt or move. These changes are taking place within our lifetimes, and it's kind of a huge deal, and it's complicated. It'd take me at least like 10 minutes and 52 seconds to explain it all in detail, which is why I did that in another video. By now, hopefully you can see how one human impact can lead to another, and how, even indirectly, they can end up reducing biodiversity. But it's hard to overlook the more immediate impacts we can have on ecosystems. One of the more in-your-face ways we affect biodiversity is by introducing non-native species, either intentionally or unintentionally. Again, there are so many examples of this that you can learn more about it in another video I did. But suffice it to say, whether it's kudzu in North America or cane toads in Australia, invasive species have a knack for out-competing or outright eating native species to the point that it rocks the world of an entire ecosystem. And finally, probably the most direct impact we have on biodiversity is simply over-harvesting certain organisms. We're overfishing the oceans to meet growing demand for popular fish species like tuna, while on land we're exterminating important predators like wolves to protect livestock. Those cows again. And the less diverse those ecosystems are, the more vulnerable they become to disturbances, including those other 4 impacts I just mentioned. And the fact is, there's a bunch more where those came from, because there's a whole separate set of effects that humanity has in the biosphere that stem simply from us putting the wrong amounts of certain stuff in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what we call pollution. So tune in next time when we'll explore what it really is, where exactly it's coming from, and what we can do about it. Thank you for watching another kind of depressing episode of Crash Course Ecology, and thanks to everyone who helped us put it together. There's a table of contents over there if you want to click to review anything, or the links are down below in the description. And if you have any questions or comments or ideas for us, please leave them on Facebook or Twitter, or of course, down in the comments below.
Okay, our reflection activity today, I want you to write in your exercise book a reflection activity, and thinking about the idea of an environmental footprint, what do you think about your environmental footprint? What puzzles you about your environmental footprint? And what might you want to further explore? This little reflection activity is called Think, Puzzle, Explore. There you go. So you just need to write think, puzzle, blah, 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 explore, blah, 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 blah. So 3 short sentences for that activity. Thanks so much for participating in this lesson, and as I always try to remind you, keep it real.